You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Christian Nyampeta, and I am the convener of the African Film Institute here at e-flux in Brooklyn. It's a great pleasure to have you, Natacha Nsabimana, next to me, and Amelia Umuhire. So I would like to introduce the African Film Institute very briefly, and then to hand over to Natacha and Amelia for a conversation. So the African Film Institute is a home for cinema that is organized in a number of four strands. One being the programming that is animated by the programmers, and then a growing library with a number of items and material that advances the knowledge and the making of cinema of African expression. And then the third aspect is the conversations that are recorded in a number of ways. And then a fourth aspect being the writer's room. And the writer's room is a space for reflection in writing that also includes making available the transcriptions where it's needed and translations in not only in writing but in other forms. So for today, we will start with I believe actually this is the first conversation that is recorded because it's also the inaugural event being hosted today at e-flux that is curated by Natacha Nsabimana, and that features the work of filmmaker Amelia Umuhire. So I will be coming in and out of the conversations, but for now I will hand over to Natacha Nsabimana, and in the process I think I will be able to explain more what the drive and motivations are behind the African Film Institute. But I think some of these questions will be addressed through the thinkings of Natacha Nsabimana and the work of Amelia Umuhire.
All right, Christian, thank you. I'm Natacha Nsabimana. I am an anthropologist based in Chicago, and I'm very excited to be here in conversation with Amelia and Christian. Amelia, welcome to Brooklyn. Karibu.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one aspect of the African Film Institute, if I understand correctly, Christian, you can correct me if I am not, but is the programming aspect. You're interested in having fellows that curate annual conversations around the thematics of that are of interest for the African Film Institute. And I think as a first fellow, I wanted to begin very simply by taking into account two things that are very dear to my heart. Number one, the aspect of collaboration, because I think I was telling Amelia earlier, and I've told you many times, for me, the work that you produce, Amelia, and what also you do, Christian, I see so many intersections with the kinds of work that I do. And one line through is, we're people who are interested in probing, understanding, portraying beautifully the kinds of lives that we've lived, but also that we're the social, political, historical worlds that we come from, that we navigate. And so our work is a way of paying tribute to that and using different mediums and probing different angles. But I see an intersection between all of our work. So I'm always really, really enriched by our conversations. And I think I fundamentally believe that there's no such thing as an individual out there in the world doing their own thing. It's always a work in collaboration with actual living humans, but also with the world around you, with people who have passed, with people who are not here yet. So I see this as a fundamental to how I understand my work, but also how I understand the question of programming. So the minute I thought curation, I thought, okay, well, we invite people, we show their work, and then we have conversations. So Amelia is the first person I wanted to invite because I am an absolute fan of your work, but I also think you're a person that bridges and travels genres and mediums. We'll see that tonight with Innocent, which is a radio play. So there is some visual aspect to it, but it's really a sonic kind of work. And I think that's really very, very cool to begin with, but also interesting to be part of the conversation around what is African cinema. What does it mean to have work that doesn't have visuals, but that asks us to listen and to see differently? I think that's definitely why I wanted you here. Innocent is an incredible piece of artistic piece of work. And you are also known for Polyglot, fabulous web series available on YouTube. Please go check it out. Which, in a way tackles the things that I was talking about earlier. It's a series, as I understand it's Amelia, that thinks about what it means to be part of multiple worlds, to be a polyglot. What does it mean to inhabit multiple languages? What kinds of challenges, internal and external, exist when you have to navigate being in multiple places at once, both literally but also metaphorically? So Polyglot is really beautiful. I wish we could show it here, but maybe we will in the future. And then, of course, Mugabo, a short film. Again, another genre, 7 minutes. This time, there are images and there is dialogue, but it's really experimental. It's not when people look at your work or hear your work, I think they're asked very different kinds of questions. It's really unique. So that is what I wanted you to be here today and to begin with you. And of course, your work centers, a geography, Rwanda, but it really is an invitation to expand your vision and our world. So even if the geography is Rwanda, you're asking the viewers and the listeners to think way beyond the geography and sometimes to think way beyond, the physical world that we inhabit. So I like the layers in your work. I could go on, but I'll stop there. And so quickly in relation to the series is, it's the African Film Institute. And so collaboration is one aspect. The second aspect was, what does African cinema mean? For whom? Is that formulation something useful for the audience today? What does it evoke? For whom and for what purposes? Is it a single story, to quote the famous, fabulous novelist Chimamanda Adichie, or obviously it can be a single story because that would be too reductive, but it's formulated nonetheless in the singular. What does that mean? So I think I want to start by asking, what does African cinema mean to you? Does the formulation mean anything to you? What does it evoke?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I feel like it also depends on the first time that I encountered so-called African cinema was in a course at uni, and it was an African cinema course, and it was the first time for me at least. I mean, that was 2009, 2009, 2010, and then it was a more geographical thing. It's cinema made in Africa by Africans. Although even the by Africans part wasn't as as defined as it is now. But I feel, for me, I think we have to think about why do we need African cinema? Why do we need to sort of gather it under that definition? I don't know. To me, it means a certain finding a way to express ourselves that is authentic, genuine, and sort of, because I feel like there are many different approaches to cinema in general, and also African cinema. There are different generations as well. Sometimes if you say African cinema, people think of Semben or Sisako, the older generation, and the newer generation. I think they use a completely different language, visual language, than the generations before. So I feel like it's a changing. But in a way, I think an institute like this can be used to sort of explore that more, and also I feel like it's super cool that you included the audio piece in this presentation because it's really, I never considered it like a cinematic piece, which made it also harder to exist because it's like, it was just an audio piece. So people would listen to it as a podcast when it came out, like, you know, like you would listen to a podcast. But this sort of seeing it or listening to it in a screening room also, reminds me a lot of my first like experiences with storytelling. And in Rwanda, like before, in the 90s, it was always like we had these like radio plays on Tuesdays.
You mean Inginamicho?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and it was like, to me, that was almost like cinema because it was really like we would like gather around like just the radio and just listen to like an hour of a play on the radio. And it was, there's no difference from watching a film or listening to it, like just from the experience of being like immersed in a story, you know? So I don't know. I mean, obviously it's not cinematic or it's not visual, but it has a lot of the same. The experience is very similar, you know. And I feel like also because we come from an oral tradition, like how can one incorporate like the time before the image in the history of African storytelling, African cinema, you know? So I feel like bridging that is kind of, it's interesting to include other forms of storytelling that are not just cinema in that understanding of African cinema.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you brought up Inginamicho, you know, because it, in a way, it sums up perfectly this question of storytelling, collaboration, but also listening and viewing. You know, those were radio plays that people gather around a radio and then listen and comment. So it's a community, or at least it's not an individual experience, you know, when you're listening to it. And then people talk about it afterwards. So there's no screen in the cinematic sense, but it does kinds of like similar things as being in a cinema or viewing something together, you know, they're just listening together, but there were also very vivid visual representations in the language. So you are also, in a way, visualizing what you're hearing, you know? I don't know, Christian, what is African cinema for you? What does African cinema mean?
Yes, it's a burning question, so to speak. One that has been addressed just now by Amelia beautifully, by evoking indeed the kinds of modes and attitudes that expand the imagination, that bypasses the eye, but includes instead other aspects of sensing the world. But it's also indeed a question that has been at the very front of the emergence of what we call African film or cinema today. So it goes hand in hand with work of liberation, the work of pedagogy, the work of imagining what learning or schools can be, but also imagining what freedom and a free, liberated life can be in a number of spaces that include spaces of struggles, I would say, that include the African continent, but also here with African American life and social life and cultural worlds. And so the way I would enter this very large ongoing question is to indeed also, I suppose, reduce it to the number of influences that, in a way, channel the very emergence of the African Film Institute here at e-flux, one of them being the fact that we're here, at least myself. I found myself living in New York, having lived in London, and then before that the Netherlands, and then before that Rwanda. And so all along the way, a number of influences have defined how I came to be and to speak and to feel. And one of them is the work of Semben that I also encountered through the likes of uni, through the incredible experiences of having friends who are very motivated and engaged, but also having outside of a lot of informal ways of learning. And so the idea of Sembene's film, African film, I believe, is that of an evening school. So École du Soir, that being the way of gathering not only images, but also indeed ideas, senses, feelings, in a way that could indeed tell or narrate the world. But also, École du Soir is interesting in that it's also École du Soi, meaning the school of oneself. So if we remain in a way of engaging with language playfully, it's a way of indeed telling one's own stories. But cinema is like most other media. There are media and traditions and schools and disciplines that emerged alongside a lot of incredible, violent global forces, is not a neutral form. So part of the work of thinking African cinema is to undo the injustices that came with the very emergence of the form. And I suppose the last aspect of this is to imagine how such an undoing can be. And to me, a part of it is to undiscipline it, meaning to not hold it so formal or pure, but to meet the stories where they are and to attempt a way to render them through which the world may somewhat become more just. So I think that's one way to understand the African Film Institute, and which is to say to pluralize what cinema is. So I tend to say that it's a home for the moving image of African expression, which is to say to try and be as open and therefore as perhaps as vague, but therefore as open as possible in order to include forms that are emergent, as you mentioned, indeed, Amelia, but also works that we might not consider as film or cinema in the capital. So yeah, to include minor figures in any manner that is meaningful to the moment. Mm-hmm. Yes, and with that, I actually have a question as well. And I wondered, Amelia, how you see yourself as a filmmaker, whether in fact that's a question that is of relevance, in that indeed you navigate a number of worlds, which the separation often is more external than internal. But I wonder how you experience the making, how you start, and when you consider a work done, and how it circulates. Because you mentioned the Innocent, the work that we'll have the pleasure of engaging with today, that it circulates differently than your other works. So I wonder how this is perhaps reflective of fellow colleagues, or really your way of searching for the meaningful form for the work, so that you're not bound by only, say, the camera or the film festival or the TV station or the book. So it's a question of practice, how you navigate the various channels that your practice finds ways through, and what you're working on now, and how you imagine the futures of forms in relation to your own work and the world you're in and your colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I'll start with the finding the form. I think it's a mix of what do you have to say and who is offering you the tools to say it or to bring it out. Like it's quite pragmatic in that sense. Like, for example, this piece, for it to become an audio piece, was because I was approached by a German radio station, and they wanted to do like a 56-minute type of piece. You know, they have like a program where they have these, they call them features, like feature-length audio work. And when they approached me, like, it wasn't something that I had done before, but I felt like because of also that experience of growing up listening to the radio a lot and knowing like the the force of audio storytelling and how far I can actually reach, and also just out of curiosity of trying to like see if I can tell a story in that medium. So that's how that's how it came to become an audio piece. But then also I felt like while I was doing it, first I did the research thinking of making a film, a documentary film. And then the funding process was a bit hectic, and it required like a lot of, knowing beforehand what you're going to do. Although it was like the way I wanted to explore it was by, exploring it, but not firstly having a complete idea of what the film will be before I go out and actually shoot it. So then the medium of radio gave me more creative freedom. And then also when I was doing the research, I found that like this story was actually one that made sense to be told in this medium, because it's so painfully intimate that it would have been something, it would have been way harder just emotionally even to do it in video, but also just to get people to talk about painful memories and stuff. It was easier if there's just a microphone present and not a camera, and not that like fear of being, or fear, or just this sort of becoming self-conscious when there's a camera around and stuff. So that kind of stuff was I could avoid it through using just the microphone, and then it took on a different meaning as well, like later on when I also found like audio archives. So then it made sense, and the archives, they were also talking about sort of vertical transmission of tradition and information that is like kept in a family and stuff. So it kind of, I feel like there's when there's a mix of intuition and fate, I guess, also sometimes that comes into play, and that is like beyond our control, or at least my control, where the medium kind of chooses you, and then you just go with the flow. Yeah, so I think that's the longer answer.
I have a related question, Amelia. In Polyglot, which is the web series, but in all your work, really, in Mugabo and also in Osa, people speak multiple languages, because that's just the world we have come to inhabit, being born in one place and then migrating to another place, etc. Do you ever think about, I don't see it in your work, but do you ever think about, I don't know, audiences, and then having, the one thing I appreciate is, let me just rephrase it by saying that the one thing I appreciate in your work is that it doesn't feel like you're asking people to contort themselves in a language that maybe they're not comfortable in. Like Mugabo, song is like in German, in French, in Kinyarwanda. And Polyglot is, there's some French, there's some German. So yeah, can you talk about that aspect, the language and the worldview aspect, and whether you make decisions or not vis-a-vis what kinds of conversations and in what language people end up speaking in your work. It feels very close to how people who would have had that kind of like life of moving from place A to place B and having to learn the language, you stay true to that. But is it a decision you make purposefully, or Can you tell me a little bit about that process, because it feels really genuine, and also there's an artistic, creative aspect to it. Like Polyglot, the second series is called Le Mal du Pays, and I think it works better in French than, I don't speak German, but for me, it was like, I couldn't imagine it in Kinyarwanda, for example, but Le Mal du Pays made sense in French. Yeah, so can you talk about the language aspect?
I mean, I think what happens is like when you grow up in an environment where like, your cousins speak French, you speak, like we grew up speaking German. In Rwanda, we spoke Kinyarwanda. Like it was so normal that that it became very hard to create something that doesn't incorporate those multitudes in a way. So it was with Polyglot, it was like the first episode was in English, and then the second one was in French. And it was sort of, I don't even know why it became French, because like, but I don't know, it was, I don't even know why they speak, but I don't know actually, because it could have been, the conversation could have happened in English as well, actually, between her and the hairdresser. But somehow writing it made more sense like that. But I actually don't even remember why, because it's not, the person it was based on, they're not even French speaking. But it was sort of, I don't know, it just came by like that. But it was actually a good decision because it opened up the series also to a different audience. Because I feel like sometimes with African cinema or African cultural products of any sense, like we're really divided along the Anglophone and Francophone, you know, like it's, or there's more that moves from the Anglophone to the Francophone world than the other way around, you know, and that's not how, at least in Rwanda, that's not how it is or used to be. So, but I feel like sometimes it's also been limiting because with the audio piece, for example, like it existed first in German, but the way I recorded it was in Kinyarwanda and in French. But then because it was for a German radio station and I hadn't even talked to anyone in German, there was like no German interview, for example. And so we had to like find a way to add German voices that would then translate the interviews, which it worked, but it was kind of strange because it was, you know, because for me, like the person, not the person, but like the way I wanted to do it was to do it in a way where if I go and I interview someone like my uncle or whoever, and the interview's in French, it's a whole different interview because the person wants to speak a certain way, or there's a vocabulary also that you don't use for certain things that you want to talk about, you know, like, so the only way I could have done it was by speaking to the people the way we would normally speak. But it did cause a bit, because I didn't know, like, I still have it like that. I work in German sometimes, I work in English sometimes, French sometimes, less than the other two, but it's hard sometimes to bring all of that together. So I find that nowadays it's like more, you know, there's work that I do in Germany, which is like more commercial, like TV writing and stuff. And then the other world exists like in the more artistic, more, you know, more personal type of work, not as commercial. Yeah.
I mean, one of the reflections I have is the images that evokes around the listening to the radio and what that means, and how indeed that bridges the gap between the I suppose the different cultural worlds that are always present within any given say geographic unity, whether that's a country or a land or a nation. And it's not a question at all, but I had to think of how I experienced the radio plays on those Tuesdays, is that I would do all I can to stay awake, only to fall asleep right before it started, and then to wake up exactly when it finished. So it had always this mythical dimension to it, of hearing the first beginnings of what sounds like an incredible play, often for adults that I didn't really qualify to fully understand, and then to wake up as it's finishing. And of course it wasn't really recorded, so there was no way of catching up other than simply being present. And I think that's somewhat also indicative of the many spaces of display or culture at the time, and how films or cinemas were seen or presented as something that you simply had to be there in order to experience or learn about it in the second hand through the mouth or the giggles of those who might have experienced it. So that's one aspect, one experience of the radio. But the other one, of course, is that I have a fondness for radio, in part also as a way to not so much rescue it, but undo the evil that it also did in terms of the role that radio played in the infrastructure of broadcasting in the making of organized violence. And so, yeah, I wonder if and it it wasn't meant to be a question at all. It was a reflection on how I experienced some of these, how this medium came to I suppose, haunt my own imagination. I wonder how that experience is, how you've lived it, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, growing up, my mom was like not very pro TV, so we only had the radio, and that was like a thing at that time. Also in the 90s, there was still like some electricity cuts and stuff. So we would sometimes, like when the electricity would cut and it was a Tuesday, we would all go in the car and then listen to it on the radio, like in the car. And it would be like a thing where really like even my mom would come and usually she wasn't really about those kind of activities, you know? So she would come and sit in the car, and even like the maid and everyone, because it was such it was the only time in the week where you would have that sort of entertainment. And even the next day, everyone would be talking about the play if it was a good one, you know, like, so. And I feel like also the thing you're saying with secondhand, like with my sisters, like my older sister, she would sometimes go to the cinema and then she would come back and we all slept in one bed, like until way too late. But then like she would come back and then tell us the whole movie. And she would be like, like the whole film, you know? And my younger sister and I would be just sitting there like, wow, there are some movies that I quote them and I didn't even see them. It's just because my sister came home and, you know, she's the eldest, so she has like main character syndrome. And so she would just tell the whole film and we'd be like, wow, and then they do this and then they do that. And even when you look at like a lot of like the films that are translated, because that was a whole thing too. Like you would watch a film and then there's a person who narrates the film. And like there's a whole generation that grew up on those films where you have, of course, the cinema, the film that you're watching, but then you have someone else who's narrating it on top of what the filmmakers did, you know? So it's always been this sort of like combination of visual language and oral tradition, you know? And I feel like I found it quite surprising that so much is possible actually with just, you know, just voices. And there's also a different layer of like, you know, people can be vulnerable in front of a microphone more than they can be in front of a camera. And also when it comes to violence, portraying violence, I think like it's very, one of the things that make it so sometimes like, I think what happened around the genocide in Rwanda and afterwards and how it was covered and even in the radio piece, it's also in there like some of the archives where people were saying like we got these images from Kigali but we can't show them because they're that horrible, you know. It's like and now you see it as well with Palestine. Like sometimes you're scrolling and you see the most horrific things, you know, and sometimes I imagine like, is this going to help? Seeing violence like that, like completely, you know, there's something about it that ends up not being very helpful for creating empathy and also restoring like a humanity that is lost sometimes when, you know, when people experience that level of violence. So I feel like there's something dignified about audio and keeping it in that sensory like world, because outside of it, images can be very, 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 very like damaging and traumatizing. And I feel with that level of violence, sometimes it's better to find like a language that is less in your face, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I agree 100%. I'm thinking like in my work when I'm talking to people, and sometimes on occasions, you know, I also do interviews. There is no way people would talk if there was a camera in their face. Never. So that's definitely aspect number one. I think the audio permits different kinds of entry point into difficult subjects. But also, I think it's, there's something about the access to that images bring that is just too in your face and easily turns into voyeuristic practices where, you know, certain bodies are expected to perform a kind of gruesome, display of violence. So, there's something about audio that I think is a medium that in our very crazy visual worlds, people don't really pay attention to. But I think it has certain nuances and subtleties that make for a different kind of experience. But I was going to say, it reminded me of my parents also we didn't have TV until very late, but we also didn't go to the cinema. But I do remember the stories I heard. I also received secondhand stories from people who went to the cinema and will go to the, and then come back and tell a whole film. Yeah. So I have a sense of like, especially I think at the time for me it was like, what's the industry in India? It's Bollywood. It was like Bollywood 20 years ago. Like I know so many Bollywood films and I've never seen them. But also I think there is another layer to the question of language and to the question of different viewings and stuff. You were talking about it also, like there's someone narrating the film, because it's in a language that people don't understand. So there's another voiceover. But also there are films that were dubbed. I mean, I remember my crazy surprise when I found out. And the dubbing and the titles of the film sometimes had nothing to do with each other. Like, Coming to America in French is Un Prince à New York. What? A Prince in New York. Okay, sure, there are some links there. But, so there are all these ways, I think, experiencing cinema that make for, an interesting perspective and not so literal. Yeah.
It's making me think about questions of translation.
Oh, yes.
Because when I grew up, we would have Spanish-speaking movies. No, not like all of the... it's not Bollywood, but all of the novellas.
Telenovelas,
right? But then you have the novella, and then I remember my neighbors were Somali, but the dubbing of the novella is in English or Swahili. So then you have somebody sitting and live translating the telenovela to all of the other people who are in the room, And I wonder how much is being missed. Like, what are you, like, you're getting something completely different, So, like, that's one aspect. But then the other aspect I'm thinking about is, like, we all know what the camera has done in terms of, like, the aperture of the camera and what it has captured and what it wants to capture and the violence around that. And what it means to be seen versus what it means to be heard, is like two very different things I'm thinking about. Because somehow this instrument it's dictating how we see, it's dictating how we've seen each other, even as Africans, right? That like when that is taken away, then what does it mean to be heard? Like, and what sort of new pathways and links do we create through the sonic versus the visual in some ways?
Yeah, I think it's also, by the way, I should say, I think it's also a generational thing. Depending on where you are, you are located. Depending on where you were located, let's say 30, 40 years ago, it's a generational thing and a class thing. Because in, let's say, 1980, 1990, Rwanda, Burundi, maybe not so much Kenya because it was slightly perhaps more advanced economically, but I could say definitely for Rwanda and Burundi, the majority of the population doesn't have a TV. And everything is done through radio. The news, the ideological manipulation for organized violence, certainly, the Inkinamico, the radio plays. And then, but I think now, to generations now, even if you don't have a TV, let's say, because, your family can't afford it and you were a kid or something, you still have the internet. So you have a different kind of digital image that constantly floods your timeline, whether it's through an internet cafe or a small smartphone, which 40 years ago, that didn't happen if you were not part of an elite class. Yeah.
And I think, too, but, like, I'm also thinking about, like, even when there was like TV, like say in Nairobi or like whatever, it would still be very local, and then if not that, it was like mediated through a sort of European program and stuff. So it's like if you're seeing what's happening across the continent, it's through BBC or like, through like whatever,
Al Jazeera,
all of that it's like, that is a very particular lens within which we're also then experiencing, each other like across the continent and what have you. That, is, I don't know, just brings up all of these things, I suppose.
But I think it's so interesting, the thing you said about being seen and being heard, because sometimes, when you see like, I feel seen or, but actually being heard is something more powerful in a way because it's implied that the person understands you. It's not just like I see you, but I also understand you, And I feel like with when it also comes to like violence and stuff, like I was just like listening to the piece again yesterday, like just seeing how it's arranged and everything, and I was thinking about that at that time, like what people used to say was like everyone was watching it on live TV and stuff, and it's not even comparable to now how much we see of violence that is going on, which is on one hand, of course, it's good to know what's happening, but then it's also, what's the price for those people who are being seen in their work? Because it only makes sense if that being seen leads to some action. But if it's just a voyeuristic type of thing, then I think I would always rather be heard than seen, because like the price of that you pay when images are so like, they circulate for a long time and it's not the same as hearing someone speak about something that is actually like close to them versus like just being seen. So I think that's a really interesting point. Also because it both can mean being understood, but it's on a different levels of being understood or being seen, heard.
Thank you so much for the conversation. And maybe I have one reflection, and it's not a summary at all. But as you were speaking just now, the three of you, I had to, and we heard Kelly Masood on the mic, and who has hosted us here at e-flux. Thank you very much. Yes, so as you're speaking now, I'm reminded of perhaps the kinds of through the secondhand narrations of the film that we recall and we retain, and through the translations that Kelly evoked, and these other experiences, I'm more and more reminded of those who make the distinctions between, in a way, the films that the way we experience the films and the world in some ways and being the difference between being seen and being heard, which is it's a fascinating proposition. And I think this comes close to your work, the both of you, Natacha and Amelia. I think it's on the one hand, it's a work that is recorded at the level of memory as opposed to it being an information. So that the way that the very recording device is memory as opposed to, say, a cassette or a hard drive. And I think that really is organized very differently socially, to such extent that it bypasses that which we today, that which is so much centralized, which is the technological importance of cultural work, whereas it goes above and beyond the dictates of what a good work can be. So I think, I'm grateful that you brought this forth. And I thank you very much, Natacha, for putting together such an incredible program as an inaugural program for the African Film Institute here at e-flux. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Aaron, for making sure the levels are working. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amelia, for being here.
Thank you, Christian, and stay tuned for more.